concerns that they wish to highlight. Now, whether or not you're presenting today, we'll be taking account of everything that's been submitted in representations. So please be assured that if you made a representation to the consultation for the application, then we do have that. Now, our role is to consider all of the evidence and views expressed about the scheme that are before us, and we'll then write a report for Scottish Ministers, which will include our recommendation on whether or not consent should be granted for the scheme. And Ministers will make the final decision. Now, I'll just cover a few housekeeping points. So, this hearing, as are all others, is being live streamed on the DPEA YouTube channel, and a recording of each day's proceedings can also be viewed there. Now, the webcasting is being managed by our colleague David Spears. The cameras are broadly aimed away from the audience, but by attending or participating today, you are consenting to the recording, storage and use of this material, and it will be used for webcasting, training and for the keeping out of records that are accessible to the public. Please can you all ensure that mobile phones or any other devices that you're carrying are turned off or on silent. Now, in terms of toilets, the gents are on the ground floor, down the stairs, the ladies are halfway up, and there's an accessible toilet through the double doors at the back of the room. The fire exits are marked, so the way you came in, and also on this side of the room too. So this session will finish no later than 8 p.m. tonight. So in order to keep to time and in the interests of fairness to all speakers both here and at all other sessions this week, we do ask that everyone limits their presentation to about 5 minutes, as we previously indicated. Now, we won't be using a stopwatch, but if it does become apparent to us that you're going to run significantly over time, we will ask you to start to sum up. And we have already read everybody's statements. Now, we don't want to put anybody on the spot today, so if we do have questions, we will put them in writing to you. Now, we have representatives from the applicant on the balcony this evening too, and they're here simply to observe. But where we do ask for further written submissions from any parties, we will also give the applicant the opportunity to respond to that too. We also have a representative from Angus Council here tonight, also to observe. I'm sure it goes without saying again, but whilst there are strongly held views and opinions, we do expect everybody in the room to be polite to one another and to be treated with courtesy. So, we will now invite the speakers to make their presentations in turn, and we'll just follow the alphabetical list that we've previously circulated, perhaps subject to one or two tweaks as requested. For speakers, in terms of using the microphones, they're really simple. There's 2 buttons on them. You need to just press the right-hand button to turn the microphone on, and then press it again to turn it off. If you're moving them around, please pick them up by the base, not the stalk, because that does break them. So our first speaker, please, is Kate Matthews. And Ms. Matthews, you've got 2 presentations to make. We don't mind which order you do them in, but please just let us know which order you are providing them. Thank you.
Okay, loud. This isn't in my speech, but I want everybody in the room to know that I actually am confident in this process and that the reporters are going to do their job, because we have provided enough evidence to demonstrate that this project is unlawful. It's so dangerous.
We can't hear you.
Sorry.
We can't hear you.
Okay. I am confident that the reporters will find against SSEN because you're going to do your jobs and there's too much evidence against them. Right, my first statement will be on behalf of Mearns Community Council. I'm an associate for them. It's not possible for one speaker to raise all the issues, so I reiterate Mearns Community Council support for all those who speak today in opposition to the Teacup project and our broad agreement with all points raised. The purpose of this inquiry is to scrutinise and to be seen to scrutinise the evidence. It is deeply concerning that not all material submitted by members of the public is being formally admitted. This omission undermines perceptions of the fairness and transparency of these proceedings, and we ask that you reconsider the exclusion of these submissions. Mearns Community Council would like to draw the reporter's attention to 2 issues which have not been adequately addressed by SSEN. Firstly, what are SSEN going to do about the tens of thousands of pink-footed geese from the SSI and SBA sites at the Montrose Basin and Loch of Skene that forage daily from September to March on agricultural land directly along the pylon route through Angus and the Howe of the Mearns into Deeside? Multiple flocks of up to 10,000 geese and more forage daily in fields within 1.5 kilometres of the pylon route, which puts these geese at pylon collision height when they take off and land. SSEN's EIA has wholly failed to identify grazing habitat directly beneath and adjacent to the overhead line. This is due to inadequacies in the methodology agreed by NatureScot and SSEN, where the vantage points chosen were within 10 kilometres of the SSI sites, omitting surveying for geese along the actual proposed route of the pylons. It is accepted that 20 kilometres is the normal maximum foraging distance that geese fly to and from roosts, so choosing vantage points within 10k of the SSI is flawed. Counting geese in the actual route corridor surely makes more sense. The direct connectivity between the supporting foraging habitats and the SSI sites at Montrose Basin and Loch of Skene, and potentially Inner Tay Estuary, confer legal protection on these habitats. Proceeding with the project has a high likelihood of causing indirect damage to Montrose Basin and Loch of Skene's notified features, specifically wildlife movement, and this would be evident had appropriate surveying been completed. The risk of indirect damage to these SSI sites confers upon the affected agricultural land similar protection to the actual designated sites. As such, under the Nature Conservation Scotland Act 2004, SSEN must carry out additional habitat regulations assessments, including an appropriate assessment. Can the reporters please ensure that these assessments will be completed by SSN prior to granting permission to proceed? The second issue relates to SSE-owned NEOS networks and the infrastructure that they have installed on the overhead lines to the east of the Howe of the Mearns. Has SSEN publicly or privately acknowledged any potential conflict of interest relating to NEOS networks? SSE-owned NEOS networks has installed thousands of kilometres of business fibre networks along overhead lines across the UK and would face millions of pounds in costs as a result of business interruption should their infrastructure be disturbed. NESO recommended that the 2 existing lines in our region be upgraded in the holistic network design and the network options assessment. However, SSEN has chosen to upgrade one line, but not the other, and instead wants to build brand new overhead line, neatly avoiding disruption to the eastern overhead line hosting NEOS infrastructure. Is there evidence that SSEN has identified and addressed this potential conflict of interest, or does the development of this new overhead line protect the interests of a third party profiting from utilising nationally significant infrastructure at consumer and community expense? Has SSEN shown that consumers and communities are not being asked to pay extra to fund a new overhead line in order to avoid disturbing the interests of a third party? It should be fairly simple to demonstrate through a cost-benefit analysis and comparative EIA for upgrading the overhead line carrying NEOS infrastructure versus the costs of building a new line down the centre. Can the reporters be certain that the new line is actually needed and isn't just more convenient for SSEN and their sister company? Right, and breathe. Right, this one's a bit more heartfelt because there's an awful lot of people in this room who have given so much time that it has taken years off their lives. And it's not given, it's taken. Save Our Mearns became the focal point for community concerns about this project from May 2023. I also spoke as an associate of Mearns Community Council today because they decided to recognise SOM as representing the concerns of the community rather than duplicate our efforts. We have worked closely with them to inform and advise on community concerns about the pylons ever since. I want to offer my sincere respect and appreciation for all who have spoken out in opposition today and over the last 3 years. The combined single objection document highlighted significant flaws in SSEN's plans, and we share the concerns raised by many speakers at these hearings. I want to address well-being, mental health, and the abuse of volunteers. SSEN has demonstrated a complete lack of empathy and compassion in their practices and has regularly stated that they don't believe there is any reason to consider the health impacts of their proposals. Community councils are vital, the first rung of local democracy. They deal with myriad local issues. You name a local concern, it's come up. They come from all walks of life with broad knowledge, but are not necessarily expert on the issues they face. It is testament to our councillors to see how seriously they take their roles and the thousands of hours given to support their fellow residents in the communities they love. It is increasingly concerning how little support is offered by authorities who both know better and have the policies and budgets in place to do better. It is said that volunteers give their time, but that's not true. Time is being taken from people who aren't equipped or supported to meet their responsibilities. Community councils receive vast amounts of information from paid employees, offering little technical support, no provision of expert advice, and increasingly short timelines for response. Lengthy documents and data sets consisting of thousands of pages and millions of words. It's the definition of a tick box exercise. They're statutory consultees, so they are consulted, but the issues are complex with stupidly short deadlines, and it's becoming impossible to deliver a considered response. It's saddening to see our government's increasing pressure upon our voluntary statutory consultees by shrinking the time frame allocated for responses. This fails to recognise that volunteers meet monthly and cannot move faster without taking more time out of their lives. It's offensive to dismiss community engagement as burdensome, to dismiss campaigners as NIMBYs, and to shut down dissent. Our community councillors have seen unprecedented engagement with their communities. They've organised additional public meetings, questionnaires, attended numerous consultation events, met with MPs, MSPs and councillors, and made significant efforts to inform themselves so that they can meet their unpaid responsibilities as best they can. How much time are they expected to give? Because it's become unreasonable. Normal people volunteering in their communities, no government support, no council support, no budget to obtain expert advice, no mental health support. Council, government and SSEN employees are all supported in their roles with significant legal protections, and rightly so: mental health support, sick pay, protection against discrimination, chains of command and clearly defined duties. Registered charities look after their volunteers in a similar way, but who is looking after our community councillors? Because I haven't heard a single person paid to be a part of this process ask any of our volunteers, "Are you okay?" Let alone, "How are you getting on with this? Do you need help? What support can we give you?" I've asked so many people if they're coping over the last 3 years, and overwhelmingly the answer is no. Residents are not okay. Campaigners are not okay. Community councillors are not okay. Not okayness correlates with proximity to the line. Since May 2023, this entire process has been an abuse of volunteers, abuse of ordinary people volunteering in their communities, their main support from campaigners who have sacrificed more than you can imagine, only to be dismissed as NIMBYs and spammers when we raise wholly legitimate concerns, SAG height and major accident risk, just to name two. This must be addressed at the highest levels because the absence of concern and support for our volunteers on the first rung of local democracy is abusive, and it erodes trust in this entire process, and it demonstrates the contempt in which our communities are held. Can the reporters ensure that our community councils will receive professional support, advice and expertise, so as stakeholders they are adequately equipped to respond and be supported through the process going forward, not just for this SSEN application, but for the massive number of energy and renewables applications that are arriving daily?
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Karen Nichols, please. And again, Karen Nichols has got two presentations to make, one as an individual, one on behalf of No Teacup. I don't mind which order they are taken in again. Thank you. Please could you just put your microphone on before you start? That's it.
Can we have a request that it's louder, because we can't hear on this level.
There you go. As a former tour guide, my voice does carry. I'm Karen, the author of the Cultural Heritage Objection. I live outside of Brechin. My background is in heritage tourism, but I did write a climate change report for Historic Scotland. As a gardener and my town regional planning classes, they taught me about sustainability, the proper way to do it. I'd like to thank the councillors of Angus Council for bringing us to the stage where the public can talk to the reporters to influence this decision. The 67 pages of Volume 2, Chapter 10, Cultural Heritage, records legislation, facts, lists and tables. The reader gets no sense of understanding. There is no language of commitment. There is no sense of Scotland's identity, nor understanding of its components. Chapter 10 is amalgamated notes applied to a checklist of requirements. Like the EIAR, my full report, which you already have, also itemises the relevant legislation. However, I give several examples from Historic Scotland and the Hill of Fair wind farm application that highlights the flaws. SSEN list the protected sites, but give no details of the impacts they intend to create. They just state the effect is acceptable or not significant, according to their own criteria. The closest example to where I live of impact is Aberlemno and the Catterthins. From the Aberlemno stone, a viewer can see up to 20 miles. The roadside signage illustrates the triangular connecting points of Forfar and the Catterthins at Edsall, in case people don't know where that is. The fact that the proposed line was changed from Aberlemno is irrelevant. It will be seen for most of those 20 miles from the Angus Glens to the Catterthins and beyond. It will dissect those points, leaving the increasing number of tourists with a reduced connection to the ancient peoples who roams freely. Less ability to understand and appreciate, all of which contradicts protective legislation. Now, my biggest concern is the physical reality of the construction. Regardless of the 67 pages compiled by SSEN, the successful contractor is required to provide another management plan and a written scheme of investigation. Given that Balfour Beatty has that contract, I asked if these documents are available to view. SSEN responded that they are, quote, only written after consent is received. Therefore, local authorities, the ECU and yourselves at the GPEA, are expected to consent to applications that do not contain control over the whole development. Where is the full information, accountability, and most importantly, the enforcement? The additional info for Chapter 10 came out after the application was subjected to public inquiry. I love this bit. Referring to a stone circle, SSEN claim that a wooded backcloth and the towers will be offset, but all is well because the cables are higher than the monument. Now, despite admitting, quote, the character of the landscape will be discernibly altered, this additional information continues that approaching, quote, from a certain angle, the visitor can still enjoy and understand the site. That does not comply with HES guidelines, HEPS, nor NPF 4. Policy 7 of NPF 4 states that development proposals should preserve and enhance historic assets. SSEN has totally ignored the fact that people who live near or visit these viewpoints stop at various levels, they approach from different angles, and they can take photos from 360 degrees. One angle, it's not enough. Of all the legislation, one phrase sums up the historic environment: a sense of place. The setting remains integral to any site's cultural significance through, quote, contributing to our ability to understand, appreciate and experience the monument, the site, the house, whatever it is. The historic and cultural world appeals to and satisfies the intangible human soul. The Heritage Crime Police have a mission statement that heritage crime robs us not just of our history, but can impact significantly on communities, not just in monetary values, but social costs, as any damage caused denies future generations the opportunity to enjoy our rich collection of unique sites. And I'm hoping that you understand why many people believe that the proposed teacup line does not enhance the environment. It does not protect Scotland's identity, nor does it offer any benefits to the Scots. The end. And
Thank you very much. Are you happy to carry on now?
Yeah, I am happy to carry on.
Okay, thank you. Well, just have a breath, and then when you're ready, that's fine. No,
Count
thank
to
you.
60. I might need to count back from 100. Right, okay. The next one is entitled Manipulation, and this is purely me speaking as me. I'm still Karen, okay? I'm still talking, my CV's the same. I wish to point out several examples of how SSEN manipulate their information to the public and decision makers. From the outset, SSEN convey their master plan at their exhibitions. Throughout the process, the only consultation is to ask locals to choose between their alternative routes, thereby gaining the complicit consent of the general public. Consultation? No, it's not. At the first Brechin exhibition, I asked the graphics operator to display section B 1.1 and the Catterthons near Edgesall. The operator automatically went to remove the existing pylon lines. Those lines are not being removed, suggesting to me that if the interpretation ignores existing structures, then there was a remit to reduce the cumulative effect. This same young man was at the first Tealing substation exhibition. He couldn't show my sister the impact of living in front of the Sidlaws because he had only programmed Tealing postcodes. And yet, SSEN sent letters to a 6-mile radius, standard, that is mostly Dundee. Why did they deny the majority of residents a visualisation if they had a Dundee postcode? Don't know. Anyway, I want to talk about the literature. SSEN published a brochure about undergrounding, telling the public the default starting point. That's their mindset. Yet, undergrounding does exist in other countries, and if you Google it in AI, you will get that it is for major national infrastructure. Okay? Staff at these consultations were unable to tell me exactly what problems do exist with undergrounding, and they couldn't tell me why they couldn't be overcome. I'm not technical. I needed them to tell me. They couldn't. East Coast 275 kV. A new substation, a line, Kintore to Tealing. What is the focus? A bonny wee lassie, apparently she's called Jenny, a bonny wee lassie in a yellow high-vis. In a frame, the subject is the substation. There is a tiny little picture down there, and the pylons are cut by the logos and the frame. Wind turbines, presume, or the substation, something down there. The subject of this is a substation. The cover suggests to you that this is marketing. It's not transparency. And I want to use an EIAR visualisation as an example of manipulation using language and photography. My road end appears in volume 4A as viewpoint 15, captioned a minor road. I can categorically assert that the road is not minor, in the sense that it's a busy, narrow road. Parallel to the A90, it is the only back road from Brechin to Kirriemuir. During accidents or flooding of the A90, which happens, that 14-mile road is heavily abused by large vehicles. Now, as a motorhome driver, I regularly meet these large vehicles. One of us has to climb the bank or enter a field's churned-up entrance. This is not suitable. It's not a minor road. The 9 images in the EIAR are actually only 3 triple-folded viewpoints. One is through a thin line of trees, because nobody can see through a line of trees. Each image has one extra piece of information, making it very difficult to assess when you've got to turn 3 pages this size, and you turn all of them to find what's been added to the next page. Now, it took me 2 searches going back to Angus House to realise that the teacup pilings were actually included on that visualisation. They're in faded grey, almost imperceptible, away in the distance. The stated average of these towers is 51 to 54 centimetres high on this stretch. Purple lines above each tower indicate a limit of deviation of 9 metres, meaning that we may end up with industrial constructions several times higher than the tallest trees and equivalent to the height of the hillsides. Nothing will hide such infrastructure, not even the mist. The photos were also all remarkably looking uphill or downhill. None of them were taken from the apex of the rise, where you will see right down into the valley. I have photos. I've took photos myself, and I actually included it onto my report that you have. And these show that these 54-metre high structures will be fully visible to residents, motorists and pedestrians. Can you ask SSEN to verify, please, that I have identified the only example of such manipulation? Now, to further confuse the public, there was a consultation about an upgrade of the Kintore to Tealing line, this one here. It's an existing line they want to upgrade and add a substation. I got a notice because I did. Staff couldn't see my confusion though when I got there that 2 lines have the same name. Apparently, Tealing to Kintore is obviously different from Kintore to Tealing, and the public shouldn't be confused. Well, I was. I don't know if they're trying to... Never mind. I'm trying to stay professional and polite. Again, I was pressed to make a preference, thereby consolidating the public consultation myth. Pressed 3 times to give a decision on where this substation should go. Recent letters received regarding groundwork investigation mention public road improvements that, according to Teacup Liaison, in my email, can only happen after consent is received. And this was received by a Rob Whittock, Community Liaison Manager. 1 week after being told that public road improvements will not happen until consent is received, I received another letter stating, due to commence public road improvement sites investigations starting in April. All that work was done in April and May. And I've got a funny feeling that more's happened today right outside our house. The reason for this national power line, but the manipulation of public information starts at the top with both the UK and Scottish governments. The reason for this national power line began with the sole director of NISO. At the 2024 Labour conference, Ed Miliband said, quote, "Clean energy is the biggest economic opportunity of our age." That's all we need to know. Ofgem funding is now allocated. The Energy Independence Bill announced in May promises less planning delays to developers. We can all make up our own minds what that means. Scotland's landscape and identity is under attack by renewables. I study climate change. I am not against renewables. Only I know how it should be done sustainably. Renewables infrastructure has a last line of defence. It's yourselves, the DPEA, Scottish Government reporters. And I ask you to see what Angus councillors saw. A weak application filled with assertions and assumptions of success with no benefits for the Scots.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Our next speaker this evening, please, is Pearl Peterkin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you today for the opportunity to speak, to the chair, the panel members, and all the members of the public that are here today. My name is Pearl Peterkin. I live at Margie near Riccarton, one of the closest houses to the new proposal in the Fetteres Forest. And my story here today is a very personal one, but I think it touches on many of the themes we're hearing repeatedly. And I am here, like the other speakers today, not because I oppose change or progress. I work in renewable energy in Aberdeen for an engineering company focused on new technologies, from early concept to commercial deployment. We turn innovative ideas into usable products and projects. But I am here today because of how this process has been handled and the very real consequences that this has had for my family specifically, our future as a family, and that of my local community. In 2023, we made as a family what we believed were careful, responsible life decisions. I built what I intended to be was my long-term but also retirement-friendly family home on the farm that we had owned for a lengthy time. At the same time, we sold our thriving farm and business, my husband and I, to fund our retirement and to allow us to deliberately downsize our lives, having reached our 60s. I know. Just saying. But we had worked hard all our lives, and my husband was starting to be in ill health. Those decisions were made in good faith based on information available at the time. Missives were completed on our farm on the 3rd of December, and then by means of a generic letter to all residents in the area, we were informed entirely suddenly on the 7th of December that a new pylon line route and a large storage site and a large power site, I don't even know what you call it, would be routed directly through our land. The option of this route had never even been on the table previously. The specific timing for us was devastating. We almost lost the sale of our farm, and we had to discuss it because our buyers were on the verge of pulling out. We were in a terrible quandary because we knew if we didn't go ahead with the sale, would we ever sell? And my husband was in ill health. So we had already committed to a new property and to long-term plans. We felt we had no choice but to proceed. The result was a negotiated reduction of £500,000 in the value of our farm. Hence why I am still working, just saying as well. £500,000, our life's work. The loss represents decades of work, investment and careful planning, wiped away not by market forces as SSEN would like you to think, but by uncertainty and late disclosure. Today, my new home, and I love it very much, a beautiful 3-year-old carbon-neutral new build with optimum insulation, air source heat pumps and every conceivable energy-saving opportunity, is now described by local selling agents as potentially unsellable. Not because TCUP has even happened yet, but because there is no clarity, no certainty, and no credible reassurance about the final impact of this project. To add insult to injury, SSEN did not even have my house on their route maps proposed, as their maps were already outdated and my new build did not feature on their inaccurate route maps. They did not even know I was there. This is what uncertainty does. It paralyzes lives. Throughout the consultation process, I have tried repeatedly to engage constructively. Yet there have been serious inaccuracies. For example, reports state that noise monitoring took place on my property. That is categorically untrue. No such monitoring occurred. And this is in the report which is out to the public. I attended consultation events and I was promised faithfully. I insisted upon it. Follow-up contact and discussion with the community representative Rob Whittock. That contact never happened. Despite being someone who is clearly and significantly affected, I have experienced a complete absence of meaningful engagement. I have been told by the new landowner that I am close to one of the largest pylons and I am in the pooling zone. I don't even know what the pooling zone is, but it's not good, I understand. He gets engagement and information as he is the landowner, yet no one can clarify exactly what the implications of that phrase, which clearly means something, means to me, the most affected. My neighbour said to me, yeah, they were saying he might even be a compulsory purchase. I'm like, WTAF. That lack of engagement is not just disappointing, it is alarming. This land is not an abstract route on a map, it is our living environment. We have video footage, Scottish wild cats and badgers in and around our land, deep in the forest. Yet no environmental impact study has identified or assessed them, not one. And we know they're there. What does it say about a process when protected species can be overlooked and people directly affected cannot even get a phone call in return? We are seeing increasingly more roads closed locally for the movement of large equipment, transformers. I run in the forest regularly. The traffic up there has increased tenfold, if not more. White transit vans with no logos on them, clearly hired, with squads of workers. We don't even know what they're doing. Balfour Beatty, Global Engineering, repeatedly, loads of them. I have been publicly labelled a NIMBY by the local SNP MSP, Gillian Martin. I found that deeply offensive. Not once have my neighbours, my friends, my local community described me as such. I have been careful, respectful and evidence-based and factual in everything I have raised. Being concerned about process, accuracy and fairness does not make someone anti-progress. It makes them a citizen engaging in democracy. I am not asking for special treatment. I know that things can happen and people can have bad luck. Maybe that's just my bad luck. But I am asking for honesty, transparency and proper engagement. Had we known at the right time, had the data been accurate, had engagement taken place when promised, our lives might look different today. So this inquiry is not just about pylons or battery storage, it is about whether people can trust the decisions of this magnitude, that they are made with integrity, accuracy and respect for those whose lives are irrevocably affected. This should put people's lives above profit. I urge you to consider not only the technical merits of this proposal, but the human cost of uncertainty, misinformation and silence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Duncan Shaw, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry. When I've got something that I want to get off my chest, I like to stand, so I'm going to do that today. Just a bit something light-hearted and kind of relevant to what we're talking about, reporter. I find it very apt in popular culture that a rural community singing about the issues of mental health actually won one of the biggest talent contests in the country and the globe. When we're talking about so much issues with mental health, I would say that this application has caused a lot of people a lot of issues in that respect. Reporter, my name is Duncan Shaw. I'm an Angus resident. I hesitate to say a chartered civil engineer by profession. So, reporter, my experience and angle of scrutiny are perhaps similar to your own. Mr. Reporter, if I may just add to my statement I uploaded, it has come to light following submission of my statement that the applicant has released plans for 2 further substations with overhead line tie-in points adjacent to the TKUP proposal as part of the new East Coast 275 kV substation works. This is an extremely significant development and clearly the next phase of the applicant's master plan. I believe that this salami slicing of the applicant's proposals has misled consultees considering the planning application. I suspect deliberately, as submitted together, the applicant knows less support for this project would have been given. I have to bring this to your attention because it is clearly relevant. I ask you to consider my request for the applicant to withdraw their application for the Tealing Kintore project and conduct appropriate consultation with all of the new information side by side with the TKUP project and place it in public eye which gives a very obvious cumulative impact of these developments. In my professional opinion, the application has lacked sufficient evidence that environmental and visual impact has been eliminated and in my view is flawed throughout. In my 20 years as a qualified civil engineer, I have not seen anything as poorly developed as this project. The Tealing to Kintore upgrade project, TQUP, appears even to have been named as such to confuse and downplay the massive negative impact this project will have on the impacted communities and those who have fallen in love with this part of North East Scotland. In rushing to gain planning consent, the applicant has failed to and has omitted essential surveys and due diligence measures to ensure the most appropriate route and transmission methodology have been established. I can only assume to limit spending money on surveys at the early stage when it was actually required most. This is a case of mistakes being made due to rush pulling a planning application together. As a reviewer for the Institution of Civil Engineers, the ICE, if SSEN were a candidate, they would have failed to demonstrate a number of the ICE's rules under their Code of Professional Conduct, including all members shall have full regard for the public interest, particularly in relation to matters of health and safety and the well-being of future generations. In fact, SSEN would have failed to demonstrate 5 of the 6 rules. On review of SSEN's design submissions, I also see no evidence of sign-off from chartered accredited members of the ICE or similar accredited bodies. This concerns me gravely. While this may not appear relevant from the outset, it was clear the applicant fully intended to follow the existing overhead line route more than 10 kilometres from the current proposal as in the early consultations. The applicant appears only to have carried out limited due diligence along this route, and it would appear relied wholly on historic data from 70-year-old gas trunk mains to form backup route options. This lack of due diligence during route selection directly conflicts the guidance set out in the Halford Rules Section 37 policy and SSEN's own guidelines, the latter clearly indicating that substantial surveys should be undertaken before route corridors are selected. They were not, and SSEN have failed to provide evidence of this being the case. When storm event hit in 2023, the applicant appeared to fear the proposed route would form extremely widespread backlash, given the misery of the local community reeling from extensive flooding in the area. It did. The applicant, fearing irreparable damage to their reputation, the applicant chose to impulsively change a large section of the proposed overhead route to land adjacent to Caniston and Lochte. Almost like a quick flip of a coin, the project manager confirming during a minuted meeting with an elected representative that he and his team had not even walked the route prior to this decision. You would be forgiven for assuming that this was an evidence-based decision. It was not. However, it has become clear that no surveys and a lack of detailed desk-based assessment had been carried out prior to the route change in 23-24. Instead, SSEN have relied heavily on the local community to tell them where there is pinch points or constraints which would prevent the proposal being consented and or constructed. In Cannerston, SSEN proposed a route through a section of land which frequently floods, which sits on top of a trunk gas main and actually is the location of our private water supply, as we discovered a few years ago. Something in which has got National Gas Transmission extremely concerned, as quoted by SSEN in their consultation report, and Scottish Gas Networks, that there were 10 of the 14 sites which were later ruled out due to lack of due diligence. However, the details of these consultations SSEN will not release despite frequent requests. How can stakeholders consider supporting or objecting to without all the key information? They can't. Further inconsistencies in the visualisations during consultation also showed areas of forestry which are no longer there or have since grown. This data used to consider visual impact of receptors, residents, has led to multiple route changes within the area, which has led to conflict and hostility between rural communities such as Cannerston and Lochte. The impact of SSEN's actions may quite probably be irreversible and irreparable, something that has played out in front of all to see, including elected representatives. As a father of 3 daughters, even in my capacity as an experienced civil engineer, I have been unable to answer their questions as to why this project is going ahead. Given how badly the proposal has been developed, much of which is still shown in the planning application. 57 to 70 metre tall pylons are proposed through the Strathmore Valley at regular intervals, which will be here for at least 100 years. This proposal runs through communities and passes primary schools. These will be double the height of anything that has ever run through this valley. The tallest structures in this valley are trees generally half the height of the overhead lines. The environmental benefit of these structures is zero, with the true impact of reaching 2030 or even 2045 net zero targets questionable. Daughter 11 asked me, why is this project needed? I researched and I attended the applicants' events and read all of the literature, but no need was presented. It is my understanding that this will be a development based on economical, not environmental need. The applicant has failed to provide comprehensive whole-life carbon assessment of when the project will achieve carbon neutrality, if I can get that out, taking account of manufacturing and transport of materials, for example, offsetting this against the green energy it believes will run along it. However, it is becoming clearer by the day that this energy will be an energy mix. I suspect we will learn that these projects have increased our carbon footprint and contributed to the nation massively overshooting net zero targets. Daughter 6 asks, what will happen to the red kites in Kintore? They will be managed by SSEN. What does that mean? That should mean that they will not be impacted by the development, but in reality, they, however, may never return to migrate from the Cairngorms through the valley to Montrose Basin. The ecosystem of the SSI, SPA, and the critically important local nature reserves will never be the same. Noting this proposed alignment cuts directly across the migration route, this will have an irreversible impact on local ecosystems, the dramatic decrease in wildlife which thrive in the area. Urban needs for rural settings, some would say. Daughter 13 asks, will the overhead lines impact our health? Deeper. In truth, the applicant cannot prove that EMFs don't impact children's health. But it's okay, there's nothing definitive, so let's horse on. Although it's widely acknowledged that EMFs massively reduce when power cables are buried. This reluctance to listen to science sounds like Smoking Kills research from the 50s, which only got full backing in the late 90s. Why? Because of economical need for businesses to make money. Why will we not learn? Why will the applicant not underground the power transmission cables? Money. Reporter, I ask you, Should projects with such a negative impact on landscapes be approved despite there being suitable and less impactful alternatives? Based on cost alone? Let's not pretend it's not. We all have no doubt that as a progressive nation, that in the not too distant future, we will realise the mistakes we are making by approving projects like this one. For the applicant, the reporter, and those listening, do we really want to be responsible for making these massive errors of judgment in order to save money? There's clearly no improvement from the days of the applicant's Bewley to Denny 400 kV overhead line project submitted by SSEN 15 years ago. I know all too well, as I was brought in to fix the mess they made during construction. And I am angry. It makes me mad as a professional to see such a lack of progress. This lack of learning from their mistakes is shocking and upsetting. I would ask SSEN to undertake a lessons learned on that project, as they should have done, and implement it going forward, noting that those local communities are still divided and reeling. It's essential that everyone works together and executes these projects properly, bringing communities with you and not against you. Let's be the benchmark, not the archaic nation set in their own ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker this evening is Fiona Troughton, please.
Good evening. My name is Fee Troughton from Lochte. I would actually like to begin by giving some thanks briefly at this stage. Mr. Warren, Mr. Little, we are very, very pleased you are here finally to hear us. Firstly, neighbours and friends of Lochte, you've all been brilliant to support us. Secondly, our Inverness Community Council have been amazing at really stepping up to respond to this challenge. Thirdly, to APAG, all the members of Angus Against Pylons group and other groups who have tirelessly scrutinised and challenged the applicant throughout this poorly put together project. And lastly, Angus Council, who on a momentous day last December surprised us all with their unanimous and wonderful vote to object to this vandalism on an industrial scale. The experience of 2 years dealing with SSEN and the Teacup project has felt like a personal assault on my home and my family, not the professional, evidence-led routing process done to the highest standards. There seems scant adherence to MPF4 policies, the Holford rules, or others that are meant to protect us. The additional news, as Duncan has just said, of the East Coast Substation and Connections project on the very day that we submitted this paper is another example of the alarming drip feed of projects that are coming across Angus. The landscape and visual session next week allows us to deal with particular issues at Lochte, but today I want to highlight my significant criticisms with the consultation process in the hope that this can be improved for others in the future, and the flaws in the EIA to show why the findings for route selection 4A through Lochte cannot be relied upon for decision making. In September 2024, in the consultation document, Appraisal of Alternative Alignments, Location 4, Carriston, Visual Constraints, the applicant states Kirkside of Lochte forms a constraint at 90 metres to the limited deviation, with very close proximity and open views of the overhead line. Please note that 8 Lochte cottages are even closer. So if we were a constraint at 90 metres in September 2024, what are we now in June 2026, after consultation, when we find the limited deviation is significantly closer, at 21 metres or less at some points around my garden, wrapping around our home as an unassessed development envelope within which infrastructure and construction activity will occur? Watercourses, ancient trees, historical assets, animals and birds, and the sewage reed beds within Lochte Wood are all included within this construction area. Lochte cottages have the limited deviation at their garden wall, as well as the operational area, the proposed conductor pulling area, and HGV traffic in full view of gardens inches away from daily life. This is the situation we now find ourselves in post-consultation, and just one example of the community and environment of Lochte being ignored during the past 2 years, when crucially changes have been made unannounced and unassessed. Staff have been ignorant and patronising at events. One staff member said to me in this very hall, "We're going to make the pylons really tall so we don't fry your hair." Good banter. Not one of the project team involved with us has attempted to understand the ground we're talking about or show a willingness to learn. Not one had wellies in their car, and when asked if they actually knew the ground we were talking about, they looked aghast and said, "You don't expect us to walk the route, do you?" Yes, we do. At the all-welcome feedback session held in Menure, when no feedback was required because the decision had been made, there was contradictory messaging on their boards asking for feedback and then saying this is not a feedback session. Really? Security was heavy-handed, people were forced to queue outside, access was limited. Conflicting measurements within the EIA and from staff ensure we don't merit an on-site RVAA at the moment. This will be discussed next week, but we're talking somewhere between 165 metres. We are a noise-sensitive receptor, I gather, at that level, and maybe a little bit further according to SSEN, but they have given us so many different figures. When they published additional materials in February this year, I did request it to be sent to me because we needed to look at it. And 3 weeks later, this arrived anonymously. In here is a USB. I'd like you all to take it away, please. I don't actually know if it's from you. It came too late. It was absolutely hopeless, and I'd like it taken away by SSEN. Lochte and neighbours are not even recognised as a community. It's not even named on page 72 of the report on consultation. Despite being constrained by a slightly greater number of properties than other alignments, it, 4A, provides the opportunity to maintain a greater distance between the OHL and residential properties. I assume they mean south of us. We do have the most properties. And please be assured it was our local community petition to Angus Council Scrutiny and Audit Committee on December the 3rd, 2024, signed by a great number of our community. And we show our community again in our submission to Angus Council at the end of 2025. We had only entered the corridor mid-24 when other communities had successfully had the line moved. So we ended up with a far shorter consultation period, and the corridor, we think, was quietly widened to accommodate the new route 4A. There has been no adherence to Ofgem's direction to include local communities who are at the heart of these projects. Just a dismissive attitude. Well, someone's got to live near them, was said to one of my neighbours. This is an inept, unfair consultation process by a team who have found the cheapest, easiest route, whatever the human cost. The environmental impact assessment, there are better brains than me who can really critically challenge it. It is lengthy, but my concerns with it include health and agriculture being scoped out, difficulty in isolating and tracking information between the different sections. It's fragmented, I fear, deliberately to disguise, obfuscate, and confuse us. I was told it was a complex matrix of measurements which led to route selection, but the baseline data was flawed, contradictory, or missing. Additional materials in February of this year were inserted, I think, to retrofit information in to suit SSEN's decision-making. Multiple other flaws include lack of alternatives being assessed, late, skimpy surveys, some still incomplete, some done from the road, contradictory evidence like the distances, no clarity of mitigations, not that they could mitigate anything for us at Lochte, no suitable safe traffic plan, no compensatory planting scheme, and a lack of an appropriate RVAA, bearing in mind the large-scale change to the Lochte community overpowering our properties. It still rankles me that in the applicant's mapping, our home, with its garden, remains as an unsurveyed, developed area with a sealed surface, as if we were a farmyard or a garage forecourt. You've been to our house, you know it's not. Our lanes and our squinty bridges around Carriston and Lochte up to Menmuir, they are not built for heavy goods and construction traffic, but they provide easy access for SSEN. The damage to them will be immense. I have a great fear, knowing how the applicant has behaved thus far, that pylon 111 may well be moved and micro-sited closer to my home, as suggested in additional materials. I think the line could be so close I'll be able to lean out of my bedroom window and hang my socks on the wires. So in conclusion, I have listened to similar stories over the past 2 days. Really powerful, amazing stories. They're not stories, they are our experiences. And I'm now convinced that this flawed process has been replicated up and down the line. Every pylon represents rural destruction on a colossal scale. Cost and efficiency should not outweigh the very real detrimental impact on our community and our environment to meet a 2030 deadline that ensures SSEN earn their bonuses and deliver dividends to shareholders. TCUP breaks multiple national policies. It is a danger to those who live and work in the Angus countryside. It should be refused by reporters and ministers alike until appropriate alternatives are assessed and those of us at the heart of this project are taken care of and allowed to get on with their lives. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ralph Pace, please. Thank you.
Reporters, thank you for an opportunity to speak this evening. It's much appreciated. My name is Ralph Pace. I'm reading this paper that's been submitted by Brian Wade on behalf of No Teacup. Our position is straightforward. SSEN has failed to properly examine modern, less damaging and potentially more cost-effective alternatives to this proposed teacup overhead pylon development. Brian has submitted a substantial document which is now lodged in your library if anybody wanted reference to it. The proposal relies primarily on traditional overhead AC transmission technology, unbelievably first seen in 1928 in Falkirk, Scotland. Despite the fact there are available many newer technologies already being used extensively across Europe. The key issue of this inquiry is not whether the grid requires reinforcement. We agree that it requires enforcement, and we accept the enforcement is required. The issue is whether this specific solution, extensive new pylons and substations across northeast Scotland, is genuinely the best option. We do believe that this has not been demonstrated. Under NP4F Policy 5, development on prime agricultural land should only proceed where there is a specific locational need and no suitable alternative. But alternatives do indeed exist. Under Policy 11, consideration should be given to underground connections where possible. Again, we say this is not being properly considered. Under the Treasury Green Book principle, major infrastructure proposals should include costed options and appraised carefully. This never happened. To date, SSEN have not produced a transparent comparison of the alternatives to the giant lattice towers and cables. There are, however, three main categories of alternatives which deserve serious consideration. Firstly, grid enhancement technologies. These include reconductoring existing lines using advanced high-capacity conductors, dynamic line rating, using real-time weather data, and technologies such as fax and topology control. These methods can significantly increase the capacity of the existing network while reducing environmental damage and avoiding the need for large new transmission corridors. Evidence from the United States and Europe shows that reconductoring alone can sometimes double or even triple transmission capacity using existing infrastructure. Secondly, high voltage direct current, HVDC. HVDC technology is now widely used internationally because it offers lower transmission losses, greater efficiency over distance, and less visual and environmental impact. Importantly, HVDC underground cables require far narrower construction corridors than the traditional underground AC systems. Germany now treats pylons largely as a last resort and gives preference to underground HVDC systems. Belgium has totally, can you imagine it, totally replaced their transmission network with underground cables. Germany have mandated all new transmission lines to be underground, and the Netherlands have a very similar policy. Recent UK studies also show that HVDC can be highly competitively economically. For example, studies connected with East Anglia and East Green Link include that HVDC solutions could provide lower lifetime costs, lower delivery risk, and improved system control. SSEN has repeatedly argued that undergrounding was prohibitively expensive. But much of that argument was based on older assumptions about AC undergrounding, not modern HVDC technology. Thirdly, offshore integration. Other North Sea countries, including Germany, Denmark, are developing integrated offshore AVDC rather than relying on multiple radial and onshore connections. A coordinated offshore approach keeps more infrastructure offshore, reduces impacts on communities and landscapes, and can lower long-term costs for consumer. Even NESO now recognise that coordinated offshore systems are likely to deliver greatest environmental and community benefits. The concern here is that SSEN only ever advanced one option, and that was yet more pylons. But planning policy requires proper consideration of alternatives. The cheapest option for a developer is not automatically the best option for the public. Sadly, none of us would be sitting in this room today had the applicant taken the time to properly explore the many viable alternatives and innovative technologies that are now available. This project could have left a very different legacy. With thoughtful design, meaningful consultation, and a genuine willingness to consider alternatives, it could have delivered the infrastructure required whilst respecting landscapes, communities, heritage and livelihoods that define this part of Scotland. Instead, Communities have been forced into years of uncertainty, division, anxiety and expense. Countless hours have been spent defending the places that people cherish and call home. Much of this could have been avoided through early engagement and genuine commitment to find the best solutions, rather than simply the easiest one. The decision before you is not just about pylons, towers or transmission lines. It is about the legacy we leave behind. Once these landscapes are changed, they will never, ever be restored. Once trust is lost, it is so difficult to rebuild. We therefore respectfully urge the reporters to reject this application in its current form, and we recommend a pause to allow comprehensive redesign that properly evaluates modern alternatives and seeks solutions that command public confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Edward Troughton. Now, Mr. Troughton, you've got your own presentation and a presentation on behalf of Ewan Carnegie, I understand. So, again, I don't mind which order you take them in, but please just let us know.
I'll take mine first, okay, and then Ewan Carnegie's afterwards.
Great, thank you.
Sirs, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I, like Miss Matthews, are actually delighted that you're here, and I'm full of confidence. Because I believe that what you hear today, what you heard the last 2 days, and what you will hear over the next week will allow you to make the right decision. And I think you know what I think the right decision is. So my name is Edward Troughton. I live at Kirkside of Lochte. I hope I'm not speaking too loudly, or can everyone hear? I live at Kirkside of Lochte, which is on Section B, Route 4A. It is situated at one of the tightest pinch points on the whole line between Kirkside of Lochte and the line of 8 Lochte cottages. I am here today to argue as plainly as possible, point by point, why the whole line, and specifically Route 4A, should not be given approval to proceed. I would like to add that in my life and career, I've spoken in many public meetings. None more so, and none more important, nor the outcome more significant than this one. So whilst I and many people in this room understand the need for efficient energy transmission, I just cannot support the applicant that so publicly pledges a just and fair transition, and then runs such a deeply flawed project. It is a process that has been rushed, that has been careless in the facts presented, and has been grossly dismissive of the people, and importantly, the places it harms. So if I may, sirs, point by point. First, as we've just heard, steel structure pylons are already obsolete. A report published by the University of Cambridge and the Institute of Physics in November 2025 identifies high-temperature superconducting cables as a proven alternative to overhead lines. These cables carry the same power underground with near zero energy loss and no visual impact, as Mr. Pace has just pointed out. Projects in Germany, the USA, and in Asia are all already operating at scale. It's surprising to know that the UK grid currently loses up to 10% of generated electricity. That's worth up to £3.75 billion per annum lost through heat, through conventional overhead lines. I say, please, before committing our community to these outdated steel structures, we ask you, sirs, to reconsider. What a tragedy if this industrial-scale destruction is allowed to happen when better technology is available. The EIA, I believe, is required to fully assess all alternatives. Why has this not been considered? Second, Section B, Route 4A, was foisted upon the tight-knit community it so deeply affects. It didn't exist until September 2024. Landowners actually knew two months before, and residents were only told 2 months later. That's another factor. The applicant's own preferred route had always been to the south of a very large corridor. But after understandable lobbying by residents and landowners to the south of the corridor, the line moved precipitously north to land at our feet at Route 4A. At the same time, and perhaps not so quietly, widening the corridor to take in farms and residences that hadn't even been in the corridor prior to this. Our community were given only a few months to recover from this shock and respond. Honestly, it was like a macabre game of musical chairs, and residents and landowners on Route 4A were left standing at the end. And residents and landowners to the south were clearly protected at the expense of our tight-knit Blackhall, Lochte, Dunswood, and Fern communities. Third, it bisects a vibrant, thriving community. Tower S111 would sit directly between Kirkside of Lochte and the 8 Lochte cottages, recognised by the applicants themselves as a severe pinch point. Lochte cottages quite clearly have spectacular northerly aspects towards the Cathetons. One, indeed, is called Cathetons View, that gives you a hint. Views across open countryside that would be entirely blighted. The applicant dismisses the impact because the front of the cottages face south, deliberately ignoring that the picture windows, the gardens, all face north. Sirs, to me, that is not an oversight. That is convenient dishonesty in the assessment. Fourth, it destroys irreplaceable woodland. A 90-metre swathe, 90 metres, cutting through Lochte Wood, Dunswood, Belly Hill and Bogey Woods, long-established woodland of plantation origin. National Planning Framework 4, Policy 6, explicitly states that loss of such woodland cannot be supported. Cannot be supported. Once felled, this woodland is gone forever. Projects deemed of such national importance such as this don't get to ignore or set aside national policy. Rather, as SSEN did with others, they are required to seek appropriate alternatives. Alternative Route 4F is just that. Lipo woodland and people would be protected. Fifth, it breaches multiple other national planning framework 4 policies. Independent review by Nest Planning, our advisor, finds Section B, Route 4A, in direct conflict with Policy 3 on biodiversity, Policy 4 on natural places, Policy 6 on woodland, Policy 11 on energy development impacts, and Policy 14 on design and place. For goodness me, how many do you have to break? These policies were put in place to protect people, to protect us, to protect communities. The fact that they are being ignored, sirs, I suggest is willful bad practice. Sixth, the environmental assessment is entirely flawed. The residential visual amenity assessment records Kirkside of Lochte as facing northeast. Well, I live there, and the front aspect does face northeast. But the main part of the living house faces southwest towards a huge 60.7 metre high S112. The RVAA was either desk-based, I suggest it was, or conducted from a car whizzing past very fast, and missed this important fact. Best practice in RVAAs requires a 4-part assessment, including a visit to the property. This was not done until, sirs, you came yesterday, for which we're very grateful. The applicant's own noise data places Kirkside of Lockleigh Garden approximately 165 metres from the tower. Seventh, and we've heard this a lot this evening, the consultation has been utterly woeful. A letter to the board of SSEN from us remains unanswered months later, one of many hundreds of pieces of correspondence that SSEN will not and have not answered. We have been spoken at, not listened to. Owners of residential properties, such as those at Kirkside of Lockleigh and Lockleigh Cottages, have been treated with disdain and, compared to many, made to feel like second-class citizens. It has not been a good moment in our lives. Eighth, and I'm getting to the end. A viable alternative does exist, and it is being ignored. We were asked, sirs, by the applicant to come up, if we didn't like 4A, come up with your own alternative. We were. So guess what? We did, and we developed one with community input and assessed by independent consultants. And it involves a 3/4 of a kilometre deviation. It avoids Lipo woodland, it reduces directly affected dwellings, and it complies with MPF4. And yet the applicant has refused to properly consider or assess it. I had taken out a piece of my submission about videos, about geese. I had submitted 3 videos of geese, but if I may just quickly comment on it, because Miss Matthews said so eloquently about the geese, the effect on geese. I took 3 videos, one from behind Lockleigh Cottages and one from my garden in the winter of 2025, of tens and tens and tens of thousands of geese landing, feeding and roosting where towers S119, 1110, 1111, 1112 and 1113 are. The applicant, this gives you actual ecological evidence that the applicant's assessment has failed to capture. They say there's little geese activity in the area. If this destructive infrastructure were allowed to proceed, then our communities bear all the risk. The applicant, little risk, no risk. The risk of loss of amenity, health, property value, and most importantly, the loss of a way of life and the loss of community that we have. Some, we will accrue compensation. Homeowners receive nothing when it is estimated that property values could lose up to 40% in value. This is not a just or fair transition. It is entirely the opposite. I urge you, sirs, to withhold consent for TKUP 400 kV overhead line and Section B, Route 4A. I urge you also to require all alternatives to be fully and fairly assessed. The applicant has been playing with our lives from desktops like a computer game. For those living under the threat of these monstrosities, it is certainly no game, and it is not just a line on a map. It is our homes, our livelihoods, and the very heart of the Scottish East Coast. If this is allowed to progress, there is no going back. It cannot be changed. Thank you.
Mr. Troughton, thank you very much for that. I'm happy to change the ordering around if you want to have a few moments before continuing.
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much indeed. I'll take a deep breath and a swig.
Needed some whiskey.
I need some whiskey, really, yeah. I've been asked to read this wonderful statement from Ewan Carnegie, who is well known to my wife and myself, and it's to whom this may concern, and this is to all of us and to you, sirs. And it goes like this. My name is Ewan Carnegie, and I've been working as a self-employed gardener for over 25 years in some beautiful gardens across Angus, one of which I consider to be one of the most beautiful and wildlife-friendly of all, and that is Kirkside of Lochte. This beautiful place has countless birds, many rare and some protected, such as herons, waxwings, nuthatch, bramblings, red kites, buzzards, and several different species of owl, all of which call this and the surrounding woodlands their home. By this he means Kirkside of Lochte. The proposed plan for monster pylons nearby will undoubtedly have a huge and devastating effect on much of this wildlife, not to mention the untold damage it will have on all nature in the surrounding area up and down the line. The garden of this property has featured in magazines over the years, and also over the years has been open to the public for various charity events. One of the charities, Pitt Hopkins, is very close to my heart. My niece suffers from this terrible syndrome. Seeing her there with my family in such a beautiful place not only gave us so much joy, but raised a large amount of money for the Pitt Hopkins charity. Sadly, I fear these fundamental local events will never happen again if the proposed plans are passed. The untold damage this will cause will be far-reaching and irreparable. This simply should not be allowed to happen. Ewan Carnegie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charlton. Our next speaker is Gillian Wilson, please. Yes, you'll need to just grab a microphone. Thank you.
Unlike some of my fellow speakers, can you hear me upstairs? I'm sitting down because I've been often told I have a fishwife's voice, and I don't think it needs any further encouragement in its loudness. My name is Gillian Wilson. I'm a local resident. I live not far from Lochte, Carriston, right in the heart of where we're all going to be affected should this go ahead. I'd like to thank you very much for being here to speak to us. I'd also like to thank Angus Council, because without their brave decision to object to SSEN's proposal, that decision was what initiated the PLI process. I would like to just put a tiny addition into what I've submitted to you by saying it's a shame, though, that these meetings are actually taking place when Scotland's premier agricultural event is taking place, the Royal Highland Show, down in Edinburgh, when you consider that this line is running through the prime agricultural land of Scotland and most farmers will be there. I think you did not necessarily have a decision over when these meetings would take place, but I think it's really shocking that it happened that way, and I have to tell you that most people consider that it was done on purpose. So just so that you understand, people are hot about that timing of these meetings. I want to discuss two aspects today. One, I want to submit that the consultation process for TKUP was fundamentally flawed, as SSEN simply did not adhere to the four gunning principles. The minimum legal standards, the failure to follow would render the consultation process unlawful and subject to judicial review. And then I want to give you a personal perspective as someone who lives among the directly affected communities. Gunning 1 says that consultations must be at a formative stage. Well, the Pathway to 2030 document clearly showed that Scottish Government and energy networks had already engaged together at the earliest formative stage. However, locals were not consulted for input at that time. And when we did have the opportunity to discuss matters with SSEN, our concerns were frankly dismissed out of hand, treated Dismissively? Contemptuously? You choose the word. Statistics that we could have given them as locals living in the area weren't asked for. So they were wrong. The projected affected acreage of affected agricultural land, completely underestimated. The knowledge of numbers of potentially affected homes and business, it was a complete uneducated guess. It was insulting. In Gunning 2, information that is presented to the public must contain sufficient reasons and information regarding the proposal to allow for intelligent consideration and response. Well, the consultation events, you've heard this time and again. I know I was at the meeting at Tealing last night. They were awful. They were hopeless. And I'm really sorry to have to say that again and again and again, but I hope the message is getting through. The consultation process was flawed. For example, locations were inaccurately described, they were poorly advertised, there was often nothing outside the venues. Sometimes if you asked, they might reluctantly put out an A-frame. Often doors were closed. Oh, it's because the weather's so bad. Sometimes it was intimidating security at the door. I mean, honestly, it was appalling. That was the word. It was appalling. I've got another page in here, I better not miss it out. I don't know, I wonder if anybody does, what the budget for pop-ups was. But boy, did SSEN spend it. It was a forest of pop-ups when you went into these events, and most of them were full of inaccuracies. There was tracks identified as roads, and there was drains that weren't identified, and waterways weren't identified. I mean, it was just awful. Out-of-date maps, fundamentally, were used. And if you had questions about the content of the pop-ups, the staff just regurgitated the content of the pop-up. You couldn't believe it. It wasn't answers. It was just, this is how it is. And the screen-based virtual representations, when they worked, were extremely hard to visualise, and they were very scant in detail. And I have to say that there was often a lot of SSEN staff at these events, however, often populated with temporary staff. They were employed for the day, they had a nice lanyard on, and we all noticed that at the event in the Reid Hall in May 2023. It was blatant. Because you would ask questions and nobody could give you an answer. There was 2 or 3 people there that could maybe give you an answer, but the other 10 people hadn't got a clue. Gunning 3 states that adequate time must be given for consideration and response. Well, this just did not happen. The proposal documentation that came from SSEN, it was vast. In fact, there was a picture on the Angus Council website of all the different folders on a table. You couldn't believe it. Nobody could ever have read their way through that in the time that we were given. We had a month to review and respond. Impossible. And without adequate time for consideration, this results in confusion. It split communities. You're hearing about this again and again and again. And it made it impossible for us to see the big picture. You've heard the expression, the salami slicing. We all know that's what's going on. You can call it what you like. That's a fact. And with it done that way, you don't get to see what's really going on. It's not reasonable, it's not just, there wasn't adequate time, it wasn't a meaningful consultation process. And Gunning finally states that responses must be conscientiously considered. Well, this implies that that was following a valid and proper consultation process. And responses must be genuinely considered before reaching a final decision. Well, given the flaws in this consultation process, that's just not possible. I'll move on to my personal thoughts. Decisions are about to be taken that are going to change the face of Angus and the lives of the residents forever. There will be no going back. Many people have said this. Rural communities are a vibrant, collaborative, friendly and fundamentally integral part of how rural Scotland functions. The poorly consulted, yet prospective TKU project is going to decimate rural Angus in a way that's never been seen. Communities have been set against communities. You've heard this. We're in the middle of it. People who we've known and been friendly with and generations gone because of this. Mental health? Well, it's supposed to be the big thing Well, nobody's paying any attention to the deleterious effect of mental health in the local area, and I can assure you it's real. In addition, as has already been mentioned, a rural road and bridge infrastructure simply will not cope with this construction traffic. And as you heard at Tealing yesterday, we're talking 24/7, 365 days, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. What about us who live here? Are we just supposed to pretend that we'll just sit at home all day while all the trucks go up and down the road and actually not get on with our lives? Joke. There's no full construction management plan. There's only a draft. How can you plan something and not actually have the information already worked out? It's just a shambles. The rural road network, particularly, I would say from my personal point of view, from south of Edsall to Memmis, but it's the same as you go down towards Tealing, the SSEN and their contractors plan to utilise, is the only route available for locals. We don't have an alternative. You bung that up with all this construction traffic, we're stuffed. There's a politer way of a word I might have used. These rural roads, they're tiny. You know, they're often less than 4 metres wide. I mean, really, they're not big roads. And they're bordered with deep drainage ditches, which are there for a reason. We get a lot of rain up here. Maybe historically in the east of Scotland they didn't, but we certainly do now. Historic stone dikes as well, they're going to get trashed. Who's going to rebuild those? Do you know how much it costs to replace a metre of stone diking? Eye-watering, I can assure you. Finally, rural Angus, it's not some bucolic idyll. It's a living, breathing, working, mainly agricultural environment where work is weather dependent and access dependent, and the restricted access, which is absolutely bound to take place during construction, will destroy the agricultural sector, and it will terminally break up rural communities. And anyone who lives in Angus could have told anyone from SSEN that their plans were fundamentally flawed, but no one wanted to listen to us at the earliest stages. It's a travesty that this project is where it is. No one listened to the locals at the start. I hope our voices will truly be acknowledged now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Michael White, please. Michael Wright, apologies.
Thank you very much. I'll keep the time, I would hope. Before I actually talk specifically about my submitted statement, I have a couple of other things just to say at the beginning. I'm a 26-plus year health, safety and environment professional. During my career, I have written EIAs, I've project managed EIAs, and I have technically reviewed EIAs for organisations like the World Bank and the EBRD to allow them to make a decision on funding a project. It is extremely disappointing. I had the dubious honour of actually managing to review not only the overhead line EIA in a month, but also the two associated substations at either end. The quality of the EIA submitted falls well below international standards, and SSEN are lucky that in actual fact it's the bill payer that ultimately pays for their project, because should that have come across my desk to review, to make a decision on funding for the World Bank or the EBRD, it wouldn't have happened. The funding would not have been issued and they'd have gone back to have to do more work. Without going into detail, because many people have already covered a lot of the detail, gaps in the environmental baseline, a separate socio-economic report that meets none of the requirements of EIA and none of the standards. Mitigation that relies on future plans without specifics. Plans are the means to implement mitigation. They are not mitigation in their own right. The point of an environmental impact assessment is to identify the impacts, identify specific, measurable and achievable mitigation to reduce that impact to the residual level. and have a robust residual impact documented that allows decision makers to make the decision on whether that residual impact is acceptable. Without a robust baseline, without detailed mitigation, you cannot hang your hat on that residual impact being accurate, and therefore you cannot make the decision. Throughout the consultation process, I came in later, after the change of substation from Fiddies to the Hurley, which introduced 2 new route options that then impacted me directly, and I became more in-depthly involved in looking at these proposals. Throughout those consultations, the usual questions that were answered by SSEN with relation to other alternatives, such as HVDC undergrounding, was that it's too expensive. Well, latest reports have shown that over the life of the project, not just construction, that it is of comparable cost. Maybe not to SSEN shareholders during maintenance of that lifetime, but definitely for the bill payers that have to pay for it to be built. Also the response of, well, we have to make sure that we get the best value of money for the bill payers, and we have to keep the bills down. In reality, from what you've heard from these individuals and yesterday and probably more to come, is that instead of adding a few pence to every energy user in the UK's bill over the next 50 plus years, instead we'll pick the low number of residents directly affected by these, and instead of charging them a couple of extra pence on their bill, it'll be £500,000. It'll be £1,000 off someone's property price, 10,000 here. It is not a fair distribution of the costs of this project. The other main response during consultation as to why undergrounding is not acceptable was that it is of greater environmental impact. I am an environmental professional, and that is not correct. Impact for environmental projects such as this is not decided on how much of an impact there is over a day, a week, a month, or a construction season. Many large linear infrastructure projects have occurred in the UK and in Angus and the Mearns. Aberdeen to Lochside pipeline I was involved with in the beginning of my career. That's a 48-inch high-pressure gas main, constructed in one construction season and within 3 years reinstated back to what it was before, and you would not see any of the damage or any of the construction that had been carried out. To say that this has lower environmental impact is quite blatantly a lie. The main environmental impact of this project is the pylons themselves and the unmitigatable landscape and visual impact that brings in. That lasts for the duration of the project, not for a construction season. So anyone that says that this is the more environmentally sensitive option is telling a fib. Then to focus on my statement itself, I currently, and for the last too many years, have worked in major accident hazard industries and know well the requirements of our UK health and safety law. As I mentioned, during my career, I actually helped put in the Aberdeen to Lochside pipeline, which is one of the major accident pipelines between Aberdeen and Montrose. I also done one in the Central Belt, and the huge Milford Haven to Turley pipeline all the way across Wales. And on those projects, I attended numerous public consultations on the other side, where SSEN would be. One of the main concerns that members of the public would have is with a 48-inch gas pipeline that is high pressure, what happens if it leaks? Or if there's a breach? Would it explode? Am I at risk? The answer then was quite straightforward. No. Even if that pipeline is breached, because of the high pressure nature, the gas itself doesn't reach an ignitable mixture, gas-air mix, until probably 50 metres in the air. And as such, you need a helicopter with a lighter to be there to actually set it off. Yeah. Fast forward to now. The pylons proposed at numerous points along the route are 50 metres plus. So that is introducing an intrinsically unsafe potential ignition source. I'm not saying it's a likely event, but our health and safety legislation in the UK isn't about likely events, it's about reducing risk to as low as reasonably practicable. Infrastructure projects have to cross each other. There's no doubt about that. You cannot be naive enough to say if there's a major accident hazard pipeline that we can't put an overhead line across it. But it has to be managed and it has to be demonstrable to reduce the risk. At numerous points along the whole route, they have been identified. That risk has not been reduced to a LARP. SSEN know the risk. They produced a set of guidelines on crossing of major accident hazard pipelines. The easiest thing to tell everyone here is that if it's a major accident hazard pipeline, the overhead line should cross it as close to a 90-degree angle, perpendicular as possible. And it should be crossed as far from residential properties as possible. The reason for that is that if you want to reduce the risk, you need to reduce the exposure, so 90 degrees makes it the shortest overhead line exposure to the pipeline, and you need to reduce the consequence, which in reality is fatalities. And that is done by removing the residential piece. Now, I speak now for the residents of Mombodo who are on the D4 route corridor. There is a major accident hazard pipeline, high pressure, 48-inch gas main that runs directly down one side of Mombodo and has done for many, many years. The proposed route at D4 crosses that pipeline at less than 5 degrees, proceeds along it for a prolonged period of time, and the proximity of 200 metres to the closest properties encompasses the greatest concentration of residential properties out with the villages of Auchenblay and Fuerden. When I first raised this at consultation, the project manager for this project's first response was, but different people have a different definition for major accident. I'm sorry, but that is a legal definition, and it is not negotiable. In all correspondence I've had with SSEN on major accident hazard, there is a distinct lack of understanding. The focus is on construction. But we'll be able to manage the construction. It is not the construction that is the issue. You're introducing a new major accident risk for the duration of that project, for as long as that pipeline is in operation and as long as the overhead lines are in operation. Given the location, damage to that pipeline can happen at any point. It could happen during construction. A nick in the coating would make it more likely to corrode over a long period of time. By crossing at a shallow angle and for a long period of time, that also increases the chance of AC-induced corrosion from the lines themselves. And we are in farmland, and it's rented farmland. So over the course of the history, or the duration of that overhead line's life, the chance of a resident, or a rented farmer accidentally nicking that pipeline and causing a breach is a definite risk. I'm not saying it'll happen tomorrow, but we don't deal in, is it likely? In routing to Mombodo, despite knowing the pipeline is there, not only have SSEN failed to meet their legal requirements under the pipeline safety regs and COMA to reduce major accident risk to as low as reasonably practicable, they've failed to follow their own guidelines for routing to cross the pipeline at an acceptable angle and at a location that is remote from as many residential properties as possible. In the event that this was to happen and a major accident occurred and there was a release, the potential release at that location, based on the UK OPA good practice guidelines for pipeline hazard distances, if that went up 14 to 17 properties in Mombodo would be in the high-risk blast area. Again, I'm not stressing that this is going to happen, but it is a potential. To put that into proper perspective, what does that 17 properties in the high-risk blast area mean? Well, I won't go into all 17, but I'll take the closest 4. That means Eleanor, age 2, is a fatality, as are her parents. That means the Coopers, with their 3 children, all under 11, are a fatality. That means my house and my 2 children and my wife are a potential fatality. And the next house, with 2 children. We are not talking maybes. We're talking sensible and structured risk management that is the foundation of UK law. If someone was to say, well, we have brought that to a LARP, I would dispute it. The D5 route corridor has been stated by SSEN as technically achievable, economically similar, and could cross 1, or it might have to cross 2 pipelines, but at 90 degrees, with no residential properties in the immediate vicinity of the crossing. That is a LARP, and that is the legal point you have to get to be able to say that you've managed the risk appropriately. And that is discounting all the numerous other overhead line routes that have not been looked at. Reporters, as has been said by everyone here, this process has been flawed. The EIA was poor. There was mistakes in some of the others that were very basic. It lacks robust baseline data. It lacks robust mitigation, and therefore the residual impact that has been stated cannot be taken to make a decision on. But personally, for the residents of Mombodo, myself, and any of the other residential properties that have been identified along the route that are in the proximity of a pipeline crossing, I ask you to ensure that SSEN have to go back and look properly at major accident hazard risk and ensure that they can robustly defend that they have designed the project to meet that LARP requirement. That is not a nice to have. It is a legal requirement under COMA, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and under the pipeline safety regs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Thank you. Our last speaker this evening is Polly Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I start with my submitted statement, I would ask if you could maybe borrow the brochure about the new substations. You will notice on the page that says current projects, this overhead line is not included. Instead, it's on the page after with a very short statement. Unlike projects that are maybe planned for the future that have significant information about them. So if we're thinking about the improper reporting from SSEN and consulting people about what's happening, that's a really prime example that I noticed at the consultation last week. So, my name is Polly Day. I live to the northwest of Brechin, approximately 274 metres from the proposed line, and maybe I'm quite lucky at that distance. I'm a geography teacher, and I understand, perhaps more than most, the urgency of Scotland's transition to low-carbon energy. I support that transition unequivocally, but I am equally clear that the Kintore to Tealing overhead line cannot be described as part of our just transition. I will focus on the northern part of Section B, Alignment 4A, which has already been discussed today. I do not believe what I describe is unique, and actually just hearing about how there are other options that are better elsewhere further north, I think that's demonstrated. A community is more than a dot on a map. National Planning Framework 4 refers to communities repeatedly, nearly 200 times, emphasising that people, place and lived experience must sit at the heart of decision making.
SSEN has said throughout this process that it has listened to communities and responded to their feedback. There are examples where that is true, but they are selective and unequal and therefore unjust. In Section B, the route was shifted northwards away from Carriston following, SSEN has stated, feedback from that community. But this did not move the line into a less populated area, as demonstrated on this map, where all residential properties have been circled. It simply shifted the impact to a different, slightly more dispersed community. And so I ask, is one community more deserving of protection than another? Or have SSEN used the supposed Carriston community feedback as an easy excuse to move the line, pitting neighbours against neighbours, misinformation to support a quick fix after some errors in their initial location and routing? A similar pattern emerges with infrastructure. The route was adjusted, apparently, to avoid potential impacts on an agri-tech business nearby, due to concerns about GPS interference. Yet along alignment 4A, farms rely on that same technology. This was raised during consultation and was not listened to. Again, why is one business protected while others are not? We know that SSEN can make different choices when it wants to. At School Hill in Aberdeenshire, following consultation in 2024, the alignment was changed to one that is more complex, more constrained, and around 10% more expensive. It introduces additional challenges: flooding, access, forestry, and very interestingly, gas pipelines. Yet, it was chosen because it better protects the local community. That decision demonstrates something important. Cost and engineering difficulty are not absolute constraints. They are choices. And for alignment 4A, our community was not afforded the same consideration. After alignment 4A was published, residents raised legitimate concerns. These were acknowledged in a report on consultation, but were not addressed. The consultation report specifically states that no alternative route had been suggested. SSEN have said that we must throw our neighbours under the bus to save ourselves. Thank you. As one SSEN project manager stated in a minuted meeting with our local MSP, it's too late. The line just has to go somewhere. For alignment 4A, we are that somewhere. This matters because we have demonstrated that a better option exists. Under National Planning Framework 4, Policy 11, developments must show how impacts on communities and homes have been addressed. Using the same desk-based approach, we've already discussed how people have not walked the line. A group of local landowners and residents proposed an alternative, alignment 4F. This route is demonstrably less constrained amongst most factors. SSEN has dismissed it. They have cited hydrology. For those who are not a geographer, that's basically building over boggy ground, and pipelines. Yet, these are the very constraints accepted at School Hill. So, why are those impacts acceptable there, but not here? If we reduce this to its simplest level, people and homes, the difference is stark. If 7 members of the lower gallery could stand up, please. Thank you. You represent the 7 properties located within 100 metres of alignment 4A, just along the section that I am discussing. You are each a household, not an individual person. You have a partner. You have moved to this area because it is beautiful and you would like to retire here. Some of you, like me, have a child. Please could 5 of you sit down? Oh, we should have planned this better, sorry. Okay. This is now the number of properties within 100 metres of alignment 4F. We have reduced 5 households in an extent that's about 6 kilometres. You can sit down now, thanks. In terms of communities, 4F reduces the close proximity of dwellings to the OH line by 71%. Within 200 metres, alignment 4A affects 15% more properties than 4F. This is not marginal. This is a clear and significant improvement for our community, but it has been dismissed. The same applies to agriculture. MPF 4 Policy 5 is clear. Development on prime agricultural land should only occur where there is no alternative. Alignment 4A crosses more prime agricultural land than 4F. Again, a better option exists and it has not been taken. I understand that I stand here as a teacher, along farmers and residents, challenging a major infrastructure company. But these farmers are custodians of the land. They know it intimately. They walk it every day. And notably, even within SSEN, there has been acknowledgement of the soundness of our arguments. In the final consultation event, a senior SSEN employee working on the project joked with one of my neighbours that I should be offered a job after submitting our alternative route. Sorry, guys. Not going to take that. So like all of us today, every single person who has arrived here, I am not here to object because of infrastructure near my house. I am here because the process has been flawed. If this line is to be built, and I accept that it might be, then it must be built along the best possible route. Not the cheapest, not the easiest, but the one that best protects communities, landscapes and livelihoods. That is what a just transition demands. And that is why I ask you to send this proposal back, to require that the route truly reflects the principles set out in national policy and treats all communities with fairness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We don't have any further speakers this evening. You have very ably used the time available this evening too, so thank you very much. You've made some very clear and very powerful presentations, and it is much appreciated, so thanks for your time. I'm sure we'll see many of you again over the course of what's left of this week and next, but for now, we hope you have a very well-earned, restful evening, so thank you very much all. Thank you.